Hi all. So I hope everyone can hear me. Let me know if you cannot. It looks like we're at 12:15 now. So I want to go ahead and get started. My name is Stephanie Alexander, and I'm one of the librarians here at Cal State East Bay. We've prepared an APA and MLA citation workshop for you today. And so I know there's a handful of attendees here on Zoom. And so if you have any questions as I go along, please put them in the chat, and my colleagues who are here helping me out with today's presentation will pass that information along to me. So here's just a little overview of what I hope to cover today. I'm going to be giving a little background information, talking about why you should cite your sources and what types of information you need to cite, including direct quotes, paraphrased ideas, and summaries. Then I'm going to be doing a deep dive into APA citation basics, including formatting in-text citations, as well as full citations, those that would appear in your references list at the end of your paper or your project. Talking about author name rules in APA, and then also talking about APA formatting and punctuation. And we also have slides available for MLA citation basics at the end. And we should have time at the end of the presentation for questions, but as I said at the beginning, it would be great if everyone could type their questions into the chat so my co-presenters can pass those questions along to me. So starting off with a little bit of background information. I like this meme from Abraham Lincoln that I found on the web because it's a great example of why it's important to cite your sources. So the quotation here attributed to our former president, Abraham Lincoln, is about not believing everything that you read on the internet just because there's a picture and a quote next to it. So specifically, why might you want to cite your sources? I have a few reasons listed here on this slide. The first one being that it's the right thing to do. When you're working on projects, papers, whatever it is that's requiring outside information while you're a student at Cal State East Bay, you want to participate in that scholarly conversation by attributing the information that you're gathering from others within your own project. The second reason is that it helps your reader know where to find more information on a given topic. Using other people's references lists or bibliographies is one of my favorite ways to find additional sources when I'm trying to gather information on a specific topic. So you're doing the same when you're citing sources, in that you're giving that information to the reader so that they can find more information on their own. And then finally, the third reason is sort of the doom and gloom reason, is that it's considered academic dishonesty, plagiarism. So when you're taking words from other people's works, whether that is in a speech or something written or something that you like in an audio recording, wherever you find it, you want to make sure that you are attributing that information and giving credit to the person who came up with that idea through citations. And so that's why your instructors ask you to do all of this work to put together citations, and why we're hosting workshops like this is so that you are prepared and knowledgeable and can do what you need to do to accurately attribute information in your own work. So I want to talk through 3 different ways that you might be incorporating information from outside sources into your own work. And so the first example, I think, is one that everyone is fairly familiar with, and that's quoting. So quoting is when you would take something directly from another work and place it inside of your own work. So you're taking something from an outside source, written by somebody else, spoken by somebody else, and including that language into your own work. So anytime that you're using a quote, you have to make sure that you are including quotation marks around whatever passage you're including. And these quotes must be cited, including with page numbers if it's a textual document, so that your reader who is reading your work knows exactly where they can find this direct word-for-word passage in another source. So I have an example up here on the slide of a quote from Maya Angelou, which it's a beautiful image. It has quotation marks around it. It's attributed to Maya Angelou, but one of the challenges with finding something like this, which does sort of a half-hearted attempt at citing its source, is that I don't know, as a reader, as a viewer of this image, I don't know if Maya Angelou actually said these words, and whoever created this image isn't giving me enough information to be able to confirm that this actually came from Maya Angelou. So to improve this, they could include the book of poetry that it came from with a page number, or maybe if it was in a speech that she gave, they could give a reference to that speech and the day and the location that it was delivered, so that I, as a viewer, and you, as a viewer and reader of this quote, could then confirm that it actually came from Maya Angelou. So quoting, incredibly important, has to be cited, needs to include page numbers, and definitely needs to include quotation marks around anything that is word for word coming from another source. So the second type of incorporating of outside information you may do in your work is paraphrasing. So this is what is generally preferred to do over quoting. Instructors generally don't want to see a string of quotes in student work, like from outside sources. They want to see that you've understood what you've read and that you're able to write about the idea that you get from another source in your own words, which is that first bullet point on the slides. The second bullet point is that with paraphrasing, it can be really critical to make sure that you're not just trading out words while keeping the original structure. So this other meme that I found gives an example of text from a book. So he died in 1987. So when I'm writing, I don't want to just say 1987 is when he died, because I'm just switching the word order. Or this could be similarly if you're just finding synonyms for words that the original source author used. You're not doing enough to digest the source material and put it into your own words. So one strategy that's often recommended is that you read a source, take notes while you're reading that source, and then when you go to write from your own notes rather than the source itself. Or you can have two windows open when you're writing in a Word doc or in Google Docs, and you have the source open next to it. You read through the source, close or minimize the source, and then write just from memory. In either of these scenarios, you want to then compare what you've written to the original source to make sure that you're not inadvertently taking any of the content directly from the source, that you are indeed putting it into your own words. And one question that we get fairly often about paraphrasing is that whether or not you still need to cite it. So a direct quote, I think that's usually fairly intuitive for students, that they know that they need to put the quotation marks around it and say where it came from. But then with paraphrasing, there's questions like, do I need to cite this? And the answer is yes, you need to cite any information that you're bringing in from an outside source, whether it's in your own words or not. So that's that third bullet. Paraphrased information needs to be cited for sure. And then the final strategy for including outside information in your own sources is summarizing. And so summarizing is different from paraphrasing in that with a summary, you're often you're distilling or just including the very basic main ideas from another source in your own words. And so one easy way to think about a summary versus something that's paraphrased is that the summary is significantly shorter than the original source. So I have another little comic here that I've included where it has like 6 of the great novels, right? And there's summaries that are just a very short sentence or 2 long, right? So Moby Dick there is on the bottom row, and the summary is man versus whale, whale wins. And I think that's taking like a novel that's maybe 100,000 words and putting it into 5 words, right? So there's a huge difference there in the length, and you're just really basically distilling or thinking about what the main ideas are of the source that you've read and including them. Now, just like paraphrasing, because you are taking this information from another source, it has to be cited. So no matter what level of information, whether it's a direct quote, whether it's a paraphrase section written in your own idea, in your own words, or if it's a very succinct or short summary of the original source, all of those pieces of information need to be cited in your work to make sure that you're doing the right thing and that you're avoiding plagiarism. So, oh, sorry. I thought I was going to jump into APA, but I wanted to show a couple of more examples of summaries up on the screen. If you're familiar with the movie Titanic on the left, so there's a 1-sentence summary of that movie. And if you're possibly as old as I am and remember the movie The Shining from the early 80s, or if you've seen it, that's the movie that's summarized on the right. So again, summaries are very, very short takes of the main ideas of other sources. Okay, so now I want to jump into APA style. So APA style, APA stands for the American Psychological Association. They came out with the 7th edition, which this is a picture of in the fall, so in fall of 2019. And this is a commonly used citation style in many social science and even some science classes on campus. Along with MLA, APA, and Chicago are sort of like the top 3 that we usually see students needing to use in their assignments. So I'm going to go through some of the basics of APA. So I'm going to start with the in-text citation. So this is what is going to be appearing in the actual text of your paper, of your poster language, of your presentation. And the in-text citations basically function as a referral to the full citation, which would be in your references list. And so we'll get to full citations later, but I want to talk you through the basics of the in-text citations. So for APA, the in-text citations include 2 or sometimes 3 components. So you're including the author's last name, the year, and then the 3rd component is the page number, and that's only required if you're using a direct quote. So if you remember back what we just talked about a few minutes ago, a direct quote is where you're taking something word for word from another source, putting it in quotation marks, and in that case, APA wants you to include the page number or page numbers where that direct quote is coming from. So I have a slide here that talks about some of the examples of different in-text citations based on whether or not there's 1 author, 2 authors, 3 authors, and or a direct quote. So at the top of the slide, you'll see an example with 1 author. So that just has the 2 components. And so I used my last name, Alexander, with a comma and the publication year. So if I published something last year, that's what it would look like. If I had 2 authors and a direct quote, I've included that example in the middle of the screen here, where you can see my last name, the ampersand symbol, my co-author's last name, a comma, the publication year, another comma, and then the page where the direct quote came from. So that page number, again, is only included if you're including a direct quote. So that's word for word in quotation marks from the original source. So the final example I have on this slide is if there's a publication that has 3 authors or more. And so when that happens, you have the lead author's last name. So again, I'm using myself as an example. The words et and al, which means and others. So it's ET space AL period, comma, and then the publication year. So this is a change from the 6th edition of APA. So for 7th, they've simplified it and just asked you to use et al. Once you have 3 or more authors. And this is, again, for the in-text citations. And so I'll be showing you some examples of how they look when they're incorporated into the text next. Okay, so here's a paragraph that I grabbed from an article that I found. And so the in-text citations are highlighted in blue on the screen. So the first in-text citation is for an article by Lee and others, right? Lee et al. So you can see it here up towards the top of the paragraph. Now, when you introduce the author's names in the actual text of your writing, then all you need to do in the parentheses here is just include the publication year. So Lee et al. Is in the text of the writing, 2015, which is the year of publication, then appears in parentheses afterwards. The second citation, it functions similarly, where they have the names of the authors appearing in the text of the paragraph, right? So Sheldon and Bryant are the authors, and then in the parentheses is just the publication year of that particular source. Now, for the third citation, which appears at the bottom of the slide, this is an example of where the person who is writing this paragraph has distilled or summarized information from 3 different sources. So you can see in the parentheses for the third in-text citation, you see the author's last name and publication year for 3 separate publications. So there's a source from Molina that was published in 2017, Patterson from 2016, and Safranova from 2015. They're separated by those semicolons. So me and you as readers would know that we would then go down to our APA references list at the end of this publication and look for the reference entries for Molina, Patterson, and Safranova. So 3 different ways that you can address it, but just some good examples to run through. So I have another example on this next slide, and one that actually is still formatted in APA 6th edition. So it used to be that this first in-text citation from Who, Wood, Smith, and Westbrook from 2004 would include all of those authors' last names. But now with the 7th edition, they want you to instead say, whenever there's 3 or more authors, it would just be the first author. So that would be Who, et al., comma, and then the publication year. So this would need to be corrected to not list Wood, Smith, and Westbrook, but just to replace that with et al. And you can see there's another example later in the paragraph that's highlighted in yellow where they have included the lead author's last name, the words et al., included the publication year. So there's different ways that you can do it. You can include the author's name in your text so you can introduce what the author says, or you can just include either the paraphrase or summary of what a source says and then include the parenthetical at the end of the sentence, which is what is done for Who, Wood, Smith, and Westbrook. Okay, so I want to run through a few examples of what is included for a full citation. So this is the information that is included in the references list at the end of your research paper, at the end of your presentation, at the end of your poster, etc. So the in-text citations, what is included in those doesn't change based on the type of source that you're citing. So if we're looking back here, there's no way for me to know what the Cummings source is or what the Who source is, right? I don't know if they're a journal article, a website, a book. In the text, it doesn't really matter. But when you're looking at the full citations, there are different components that are required based on the type of information source that you're looking at. So the first one that I wanted to go through is a full citation for a journal article. So it includes everything that's in this list if it's available. So the authors, last name and initials, the publication year, the title, the journal title, volume number, issue number, page numbers, and then the DOI if it is available. So a DOI is a digital object identifier, and many newer journal articles do have specific DOIs available. And the nice thing about the DOIs is that they provide a link directly to the information about that specific article from the publisher. So I'll show you some examples of what a full journal citation would look like. So here's one that is from the journal Psychological Science. So the journal article citation starts with all of the authors. So there are 4 authors of this article, and they're listed last name, comma, and then any provided initials. So Fernbach has 2 initials, P and M. Rogers only has 1 initial, T. And then Fox and Sloman also have 2 initials. So in that case, you're just using whatever information is available to you. If they've included a middle name that you could include, or another family name that you could include as a second initial, then you do. And if it's not there, then you just don't include it. So you include the authors. Next is the year in the parentheses. So for this example, it's 2013, followed by a period. Then you include the title of the article. So this is the journal article title. Then you include the name of the journal, which in this case is Psychological Science, a comma, then the volume issue for the journal, which is 24, the issue of the journal, which is 6, and then the page numbers and the DOI if it's available. And I'll talk about what is needed for capitalization and italicizing in a few minutes. Okay, so I wanted to do the same thing for a book, and we're also going to talk about a web source next. So a book citation is much simpler. You're including the authors, the copyright year, the title of the book, the publisher, the DOI or URL, and then the edition sometimes if it's available. So I'll show you examples on the next screen of what that looks like. So here's 3 examples of book citation sources. The first one has 2 authors, and you can see they're led by the last name with initials. The ampersand appears before the last author. The publication year is in parentheses next. The title of the book is included and italicized. And then the name of the publisher is the last thing in the first citation here. Now this second citation follows the same format where it's author, publication year, name of the book. Included is the edition of the book in parentheses, and then the publisher of that book. And then finally, the third is another example of a book with 2 authors. So using the ampersand in between, then the publication year, the title of the book, the edition of that book, and then the publisher. So the final format I wanted to talk about was the full citation for a website in APA. So again, I mean, if you're familiar with APA, you're probably seeing a pattern here. You lead with the author, then you have the date. So for a website, often you'll be able to find not just the year of publication, but the month and day. So the format for that is leading with the year, comma, then month, date. The title of the web page, so the page that you're actually looking at usually has some kind of title. The source, so this is new with the APA 7th edition. So the source, if there is usually the official name of the website. So the source, if the source is the same as the author, then you don't include the source in order to avoid repetition. And so I'll give you an example in a second. And then the URL is the last thing that you would include. So I have a couple of examples here. The first one is something that's from the American Psychological Association's website. So there wasn't a specific author for this website. So the creator of the website or the source is actually listed as the author. Then there's the year of publication, the title of the web page, or looks like this is a document that's available on a web page. It's a PDF, and then the URL. The second example of the website is, again, leading with the source or the organizational author. So you can see that this website is the truthinitiative.org. So the author is Truth Initiative. You have the year, month, and day that this particular web page was published. The website or the web page name appears and it's italicized, and then the URL is included. The number one thing that's changed about the website citations in the APA 7th edition is that you're no longer including the words retrieved from before the URL. You're just including the web page name, period, and then including the URL. So that's why these two look a little different. I wanted to give a couple of examples of instances where you might not use the source. So going back to this slide, so if the source again is the official name of the website and also the author, then you wouldn't include the source. So one example that I could think of is if you were citing something that was coming from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, right? So it would be from the CDC's website. You would include the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention as the author. And so then you would skip this fourth step. You wouldn't again say that it was coming from the Centers for Disease Control. But on the other hand, if you had a web-based newspaper article, for example, from the New York Times, and there was a specific author, so let's say I wrote for the New York Times, so the author would be me, so you'd include my last name, Alexander, S, period, the date that the article was published, the title of the web page, which in this case would be the title of the article, and then you'd want to include the source that it came from. So if I'm writing for the New York Times, then the New York Times would be included in the citation, and then you'd include the URL. Okay, so we talked earlier about the in-text citations and how many authors you were supposed to include. So for the in-text citation, you're cut off at only including 2 authors, right? So for the first author, you include their last name. For 2 authors, you include the 2 authors' names separated by an ampersand. But then once you hit 3, you're including the first author and then the words et al. But for a full citation, so this would be what would be included in a reference list, right? A full, all of the detailed citation. You're actually now with APA 7th supposed to include up to 20 authors. So APA 6 would have you include only 7 authors before, but now they've expanded that so that you're giving credit in your full reference to up to the first 20 authors. And it may seem, I don't know, I don't want to say crazy, but it's a little crazy that it is kind of a little crazy that you'd have 20 authors on the same publication, but this commonly happens in science where you have a lot of collaborators working in a lab and they're all working on a project and then they get credit on the ultimate publication. And you can use, one of the resources that I recommend that you use is a resource called the Purdue OWL. So this is a website that you can go to that's from Purdue University that does a really good job of providing a lot of the details and specific cases for citing in APA 7th. So I've included that reference here on this slide. Okay, so we've talked through some of the basics of in-text citations in APA some of the basics of looking at journal article citations, book citations, and also website citations using APA. But I wanted to emphasize some of the, I don't know, like some of the details about how you're supposed to format those citations. And two of the really key things are when you're supposed to capitalize words, and then also when you are supposed to italicize things. And so I've included that information on this slide. So with APA, one of the things that I see the most mistakes with is making sure that the capitalization in citations is correct. So when you're citing an APA, I have an example at the bottom of the screen of a journal article, and APA uses what is known as sentence case. So sentence case is when you capitalize the first word of a title and any subtitle, capitalize any proper nouns or acronyms, but all other words should start with a lowercase letter. So when you're looking at the example at the bottom of the screen, you can see that the article title is Friendships Through IM, examining the relationship between instant messaging and intimacy. And you could see only friendships, which is the beginning of the start word for the title, examining, which is the beginning word for the subtitle, and then the acronym IM, which stands for instant messaging, are capitalized. So this is what would occur for article titles, book titles, and web page titles. Now, when you have the name of an actual journal, like is what appears after the article title, that's actually in what's known as title case, where all of the important words are capitalized because it's a proper noun of this journal, the name that is given to this journal. So you can see that for the journal name, so Journal of Computer Mediated Communication, journal, computer mediated, and communication are all capitalized. So that contrasts with the capitalization of the article title. Same thing if you had a book and a book chapter. So the book chapter would have the lowercase, and then the book title itself would be using title case. Okay, so I think I just have a couple of examples of just comparing again the in-text and full citations in APA. So again, when you're writing, you're using only sort of like the short note for your reader to refer them down to the full citation that's in your references list. So my example here is Lee et al. In 2015. So I would maybe start a sentence with this. So Lee et al. 2015 found that blah, 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 whatever I'm including in my paper, right? So that's how I'm introducing that source, giving an in-text citation, and letting my reader know that what comes next came from an information source that is not my own ideas, right? And then at the end of my paper, I would include the full citation, which appears here at the bottom. This is for a journal article. It includes all of the author's names, the publication year, the article title, the journal title, the volume of the journal, and then the page numbers. Okay, so I wanted to quickly point out some of the changes, some of the major changes in APA from the 7th edition versus the 6th. So we talked about book citations, and so if you are familiar with APA 6, you would know that the publisher location is no longer included. So no longer do you have to figure out if it was published in New York or London or some other random location where you had to then include the state or the country name. The location just isn't there. It's only the publisher's name that gets included. So we talked about the second bullet, whereas the in-text citation, a work with 3 or more authors is now abbreviated to only the first author's name and the words et al. So you're not anything with more than 2 authors, you're only getting that lead or first author and the words et al. So contrast that with the full citation, the reference list, you're now including the names of up to 20 authors rather than just 7. So now in your full reference, you could have up to 20 authors appearing. The digital object identifiers that we discussed earlier are now formatted the same as a URL. So it would just be the HTTP and then the DOI information. You don't need to precede it by the acronym DOI colon. The URLs are also simplified in that you don't have to include the words retrieved from any longer. You just include the URL at the end of your citation. And then the last bullet down there at the bottom is about what we were talking about with the sources for websites, right? So my example of getting an article from the New York Times, now you would now include the word New York Times after the name of the article, which wasn't the case with the APA 6th edition. So I wanted to share two basically resources that you can use for sample papers. And I find this to be incredibly helpful when helping students. And APA has published a free sample paper that they've actually annotated that you can look at to get tips on how to format your entire paper from start to finish, both the title page and then your in-text citations and the full references list. So I'm going to go out of this slideshow and go to that page so you can see it. So I'm going to click on the link. And I believe you should still be able to, I think I can close out of this and show you what it looks like. Sorry, I'm just trying to rearrange my desktop here. So it brought me to a page, I believe, let's see. Let me try it one more time. All right, so this link takes me to a page from APA where I have a link to see an annotated student sample paper. Are you still? So I'll get to the question in the chat in just a second. So here's the example of an annotated student paper from APA. And so when I say annotated, what they've done is like basically taken a picture of the paper. So everything that you see in white is the student paper. And then it's giving you these helpful little call out boxes pointing to what it's referring to. So here's how the student paper's title should be formatted, and you're getting all of this guidance throughout the paper of how to do your in-text citations, what they should look like. And then as you keep going, you will scroll down through the pages until you get to the references list. Okay, so here's the references list. So there was a question in the chat. Oh, okay, so the question is, from my experience, the URL usually comes in a different color and is underlined. Should it be cited just like that on the reference, or do I remove the underline and the color? So Jen, you can see from the APA example paper here, like this, I actually included this in my presentation, but this one is a link that's coming from the web. It's in blue because that's how links usually appear. And the great thing about leaving them underlined and in that color is that it indicates to your reader that it is something that's clickable. So if it's a document, like a Microsoft Word document that you're submitting, or a Google Doc, or even a PDF, that software application will have that that URL be clickable for your reader. And so that's like the best case scenario, basically, because then they can go directly to that resource without having to hunt around and find it. So given the example from APA itself, I would say that you leave it the same as you would find it, right? So as you're copying it in, the software is going to put it into this blue color because it communicates to and underline it because it communicates to the reader that it is a hyperlink that is then clickable through the software. Yes, you're welcome. Are there any other questions about APA that we can address The slides that I've already covered is what I'd planned to cover on APA, but I could field specific questions if there are others. And I do have a few slides about MLA, but I saw from the registration information that I think most people were interested in APA. So you can let me know if you want to see the MLA slides or not. And you can do that in the chat if you'd like. Yes, I'm here for the APA. I think from the list, it was mostly APA. What I do want to say more about APA is that, so I believe the links to the information has been shared in the chat. So APA, there's this great reference guide that they put together for the 7th edition that's color coded. It's really fancy and pretty. You can look at that, and it has book citations, book chapter, and then journal article citations as well. And then I love looking at the annotated free student paper because you can see it in context, like how it's supposed to work. And there's lots of different examples that they're giving on this sample paper. I also, on my slides, I had a link to our colleagues at CSU Dominguez Hills. They've put together a really great sort of brief APA guide for the 7th edition where they've included, they have a video, they have some examples of how you do in-text citations for different types of sort of information integration, that information that you're including. So the direct quotes that we talked about, or summarizing or paraphrasing, examples based on the numbers of authors. And then here are their full reference examples. And I'm scrolling manically, but they also have a sample student paper that they've put together. So you can scroll through that and look at how they are doing both the in-text citations in the sample paper and then the full citations at the end. And then the last thing that I wanted to mention about APA is that right now, if you have questions about it, the librarians at CSU East Bay are available on our chat reference, and I'll show you where you can get to that. So I'm just going to go to our library's homepage, and then right on the library's homepage itself, you can see where the Ask Us window appears, and so you can chat questions to the librarians 7 days a week for different hours that were available. So it's 9 to 7 Monday through Thursday, 9 to 3 on Friday, and then in the afternoons on the weekends. And we can answer any questions that you have about citing specific things using APA 7th. And in addition, even when we're not here, you won't see this window, but you'll see a link to access our 24/7 chat. So we partner with libraries around the world to provide chat service to our students around the clock. So if you're working at 2 in the morning, you're not going to get an East Bay librarian, but you'll get a librarian from another library who will be able to answer your questions about APA 7th. So you have what we've talked about in this workshop, but you also have access to ongoing support from the librarians at Cal State East Bay and beyond. And then Tom is mentioning in a chat that if we're not able to pick up your chat message, it will go to our email and we will respond that way. So sometimes the chat does get a little bit busy, but we try to minimize the number of chats that go to email. But yeah, if that happens, then we will get back to you. And we respond to emails really quickly during the week, and then it's like within 24 to 48 hours over the weekends. So I'm not hearing an urgent need for me to go over the MLA information in the next 15 minutes that we have, though it's not too late for me to do that. So if it's just open for questions now. If there are more specific questions about APA, I'm happy to answer them. Yeah, so I'm happy to answer them. So let me know if you have more specifics that you'd like to know about. I'm giving everyone chatting time in case there are any outstanding questions. Okay, thank you for that. Okay. Oh, and then please pay attention to Gur's message and the chat. So if you want to have your attendance at this workshop counted towards the information literacy badge, you just enter your email in the chat box. And after you've attended 3 workshops, you will get the online information literacy badge that can be put in your LinkedIn profile and other places. Thank you. You too. Have a good day and stay safe. And please follow up with us if you have any specific questions, because we're happy to answer them. Thanks, everyone.